Ever wonder what really happens to animals on the factory farms where they get turned into food? On this episode, the shocking truth is revealed from an eyewitness who has seen what the industry does not want you to see. Stick around if you dare and hear her gripping, unadulterated tales of what life is really like on a factory farm. Welcome to Puppies, Pandemics, and Public Health. I am Dr. Johnny Lieberman. If you've ever wondered how your everyday choices, including what you eat, what you buy, what you wear, and the medicines you take, impact your health, the health of your family, animals, and the planet, you are in the right place. Let's get to it. Erin Wing is the Deputy Director of Investigations for Animal Outlook and previously worked as an undercover investigator, including investigations in the dairy, chicken, and aquaculture industries, including the first ever undercover expose of salmon aquaculture in the U.S. Erin's investigations and her advocacy work shed light on the interconnection of human and animal exploitation that occurs on farms in the animal agriculture system. Her work has been featured in the Washington Post, The Guardian, and the New York Times. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Puppies, Pandemics, and Public Health. I'm Dr. Johnny Lieberman, and I am very pleased today to welcome onto the show Erin Wing of Animal Outlook. Erin, thank you so much for taking some time out and joining the show today.
Thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Erin, if there was one thing that you wish the public knew, or perhaps the most important take-home point of everything that we're going to talk about in our show today, something you don't want them to miss, what would that be?
The most important thing that I would want the public to know is how important undercover investigations into animal agriculture facilities are. We go into these places where there are animals being farmed. A lot of consumers who will go out to the grocery stores and purchase animal products, they have no idea because the packaging that they're seeing in the milk section or the butter section of the grocery store is not going to show what's actually happening to those animals. And they go in and they purchase those products with the assumption that the animal that the product was harvested from or produced by was treated fairly. And that's not the case from so much investigations work that has been done. We use hidden cameras as instruments of truth. And we take that truth and we put it in the hands of the people so they have a right to know what they're purchasing with their hard-earned money. I don't believe that should be hidden from anyone. Of course, the animal agriculture industry fights tooth and nail to prevent undercover investigations from happening. There's a reason why when we go into those facilities and we document what's actually happening behind those closed doors, that's when we realize this is why they don't want us to do this. This is what they don't want the public to know. And the public does have a right to know. There's a tremendous amount of importance that's behind the work that we do. And that's something that I'd like for everyone to know.
That sounds like really important work that you're doing in these undercover investigations. I don't think anybody in the public likes being lied to. We see labels on food all the time, and there's labels which make it sound like the animals are well treated on the way to getting turned into food or having their products get turned into food. We learned a little bit about this in prior episodes. It's really hard to trust those labels. I want to share with the public a little bit about how you got to what you're doing. Tell me a little bit more about how it works. How do you get into a facility? You're actually seeing conditions in there firsthand. How did you get to this pathway, and how were you able to get to the truth, which I think is so important to share with the public?
Yeah, thanks for asking about that. I usually like to share this story about how I got to where I'm at now or how I even ended up doing undercover investigations work because I think a lot of people who aren't familiar with animal advocacy work, they have a particular picture of what an animal rights person looks like, what their background is. I think there is definitely perception that a lot of people who advocate for the rights of animals come from positions and places of particular privilege. That's why they can focus on helping animals. And I usually like to debunk that with just how I ended up doing this work. The background that I came from was so very far removed from animal rights or veganism or anything like that, or being even vegetarian was something that was not thought of in my family. I come from a background of generational poverty, and my father immigrated here from South America. And my mom, she grew up in public housing in Manhattan, New York. There was just a constant idea of we are just focusing on our own survival in my family. My family didn't have the capacity to extend that compassion to animals. They were just so focused on just getting by. For me, I always had a connection with animals, and they brought me comfort during a lot of hard times when I interacted with companion animals like dogs and cats. I was particularly drawn to helping animals. Life was not very easy for me to just focus on anything other than helping my family financially. So I ended up working 2 or 3 jobs. By the time I was 23 years old, that was my first time I ever met a vegan. I had a lot of interesting conversations about animal advocacy work. I started watching a lot more animal rights documentaries. I saw undercover investigations footage in those documentaries. And I thought to myself, I think I can do that. So at about the age of 25, I decided I wanted to do something more meaningful with my life than to just work dead end retail sales jobs or 2 or 3 dead end jobs at a time, which was what I was doing before. I decided to become a undercover investigator of animal cruelty. So that was a huge shift in my life. I had the ability to prepare for the most part to go to animal agriculture facilities, but you can never really prepare yourself too much for that because there are so many things that I encountered for the first time that were a complete shock to me.
You found something meaningful to you that was a cause bigger than yourself. And I need to just stop and give you credit. That occurred to you like 30 years before it ever occurred to me. And maybe there's a lot of listeners who can resonate with that. Everyone has to work a job to get by and take care of our family. We're a society that's focused on very centric. It's based on me, what's good for me, what's good for my immediate surroundings. There's just so much more. It took me much longer to realize that, to get into this animal space, that there's so much more than I'm going to just eat what satisfies my palate for 10 minutes, 3 times a day. You recognize that. And I just want to share that with our listeners. Have you ever thought about that? Is maybe you're already there? And if so, outstanding. I lived a lot of my life not ever thinking about it. It was a job. Let's make some money. Let's take care of me and those around me. There's so much more. Erin, it sounds like you found that and you went down this path, and it's really for the greater good. So one, I want to say it's amazing that you got there. So much of the world can be better off because of it. You went down this path, you found something that was bigger than you, where you wanted to make a difference. Let's talk about what you found, maybe on the first facility you went into. What's some of the information you discovered that maybe surprised you and might surprise our listeners?
Usually my response is I was just crazy enough to do this kind of work, specifically undercover investigations work. The first investigation that I did was on a chicken farm in Virginia that was contracted to Tyson Foods. When I stepped into one of those barns for the first time, I saw a sea of chickens in front of me in a really long shed that was very dark. So they kept the lights down. for a specific reason, mind you. And it was to make sure that the chickens weren't moving around too much, because if the light was turned on, they would move around more. And if they sat still in the dark, they would put on more weight. So that's why the sheds were kept so dark. So they didn't even have any light, let alone sunlight. Sunlight was just like not a thing that would go into those barns. The smell was the first thing that hit me, just very intense. Ammonia fumes, to the point where I would breathe in and my nostrils would be completely on fire. My chest would burn as well with every breath I breathed in. After some time of being in those barns, when I would breathe after leaving them and leaving the chicken farm, every breath I took, it was just a rattling sound that was coming from inside of my throat. And that's just how severe the ammonia fumes were inside of those sheds.
Where does the ammonia come from?
20,000, 25,000, 10,000 chickens in each shed, and they're relieving themselves on the ground that they're walking on. If you think tens of thousands of chickens doing that all in one place, concentrated to one area.
Pooping.
Yeah, with chickens, it's just all together, like the urine and the feces, they're not separate. So bodily waste that they're releasing in those sheds. I could see little bugs crawling around everywhere on the ground where the chickens were walking on. If I stepped in the litter, which was basically just the dirt that was on the ground in the shed, I would see bugs just fleeing from where I stepped. Then it's just the bodily waste in the litter as well. And then not only that, but it's also the smell of decomposing bodies, because in those chicken sheds, there were so many chickens who were dying among the living as well. And then when I was walking through, a lot of my job duty at that farm site was just to pick up dead chickens. And there were 9 sheds on that one farm site, each housing tens of thousands of chickens. And they were dying every day, every single day in each shed. There would be days where a lot of them would die. There were some dead bodies that wouldn't get picked up because they'd get missed, that the workers would overlook them. And then the bodies would continue to decompose in those sheds. I remember in some cases, I would walk through sheds where I was picking up bodies that were just pouring through my hands because they had decomposed so much, the chickens who died in there and didn't get picked up for days. And when we finally would come across those dead chicken bodies, they would just have turned into liquid by that point. And that's how much they decompose. And the smell was just horrendous. I still can picture what those corpses looked like, to just drop them into the buckets that we were using to carry around the dead bodies of the chickens, and then throw them into a tractor, and then pile up that tractor bucket with the dead bodies of chickens that were being pulled from the sheds, and then dump them out into a mortality pile. So all of the mortalities from the sheds would go into a pile in the back of the farm. And that's what we did every day. And that took a very long time, because it was just, the sheds were massive. There were so many chickens, and there were a lot of dead bodies to pick up.
And are these egg-producing chickens or
broiler chickens? So this was a farm that is designated by the animal agriculture industry.
I want to stop here. Erin painted this amazing picture. You can't get a sense of the smell from what Erin's describing, or maybe you can. These living, breathing, sentient animals that become your food spend their entire lives in a giant dark shed, packed body to body with other chickens, waiting in their own waste. So much of it that the fumes, which are toxic ammonia fumes, they breathe that in all night. Just what Erin was describing, like it hurts her lungs, it's toxic to chicken lungs too. That is their life. And that's what you're eating. Those animals who lived in those conditions, that's so bad that they would just die spontaneously, a certain number of them. That's what you eat when you go to the store and you buy a nicely packaged chicken breast that looks white and clean and it's got no smell on it, that is contaminated with bacteria We talked about this in another show. The chances of that raw chicken being contaminated with bacteria are well north of 50%. And this firsthand experience, now you know why. They wade their entire lives in their own filth. Of course, they're going to have E. coli and they're going to have other stool bacteria coating their body. That's what you're eating. This is the industry that you're supporting when you buy that chicken breast or chicken thigh or the whole rotisserie chicken that they have in the deli section in some of these grocery stores. I want you to try to create in your head these toxic fumes, the disgusting conditions that Erin described, and think about that when you're going shopping. That's what you're supporting, and that's what you're putting in your body.
I can just touch on a couple more things from that investigation that stay with me to this day. So not only
Yes.
was it just really shocking to see how those animals are actually farmed, where it's completely unnatural, right? Just keeping them in these sheds. They're not leaving. They're not going out and walking around in the grass. They're staying in those sheds from the time they hatch from eggs and they're delivered from the hatchery to the farm site to the time that they're sent off to slaughter. So that's about 45 days. To see those birds live in those conditions was really horrifying for me. They're subjected to living in filth, right? But also they were subjected to extreme cruelty as well by workers. In one case in particular, during my time at the facility, we had just received a new flock to begin a new flock cycle. So these are really small baby birds that were delivered to the farm site. The standard operating procedure at these farm sites is to just grow these birds to hold a tremendous amount of weight per bird to the point where their bodies can't support it. They want the birds who are going to grow the fastest, the most consistently, and put on the most amount of weight per bird. If there were any young chicks who weren't doing that, they would kill them off. And they would do that at the facility through a method called cervical dislocation. This is an industry standard method of killing these birds, which is to sever the skull from the spinal cord. And they do that by hand, but they have to catch the bird in order to do that. With these young chicks that had just been delivered not long ago to the facility, they're very fast. They're running for their lives from those workers. So what the workers ended up doing was fashioning these weapons, which were made from plastic pipes with nails driven into the ends of them. And they were essentially bludgeoning these chicks to incapacitate them. And then they would pick them up and attempt euthanasia on them by breaking their necks. These baby birds were treated this way, where they were bludgeoned or impaled in some cases on the ends of these weapons that were made from plastic pipes with nails driven into the ends of them. So it's really brutal, very violent way to go. For what? Because they're not growing fast enough, or they might have been injured or sick, and there was never a veterinarian on site to treat any of those birds. The sense that I got was that the farm owner didn't deem the birds valuable enough to even waste the money to hire a veterinarian to come on site and heal these birds if they were sick or injured. So instead, they just killed them off. So it's a really brutal, careless way of growing these animals, is what I observed at that chicken farm.
I can't imagine what that was like to witness that. I read and been taught a lot about what happens on these farms, but never heard that before. That's brand new for me and just adds another layer of seemingly unnecessary violence. Not that any of it is necessary, but extreme. To the industry, it's really just cutting their losses. If they're seen as profit potential, and if they're not going to generate profit in the specified period of time, then they have no value. These living, breathing animals clearly have an interest in their own life. As you said, they're running because they know death is coming. Doesn't matter. They're just a product. These animals have no protections at all on the farm. There's no federal law that protects them at all. Most state laws exempt normal husbandry practices or standard practices for animals on farms. chickens can have almost anything done to them on these facilities.
That's true. And unfortunately, it's up to us, Animal Outlook in particular, as an organization. We have a legal advocacy department where we focus on obtaining justice for these animals because the state cruelty laws should apply to these animals. They should not be exempt from being protected under the law just because they happen to be on a farm site where they're being grown and produced to eventually become a food product for consumers. Yeah, so they should be protected. We do everything that we can to leverage our investigations to advocate for stronger protections for the animals.
Yeah, that's amazing. Someone needs to speak up for them to try and get change, and you're doing it. You and Animal Outlook, just like any nonprofit, you can't do it alone. We need the public to speak up, learn about it, and share this information, potentially make different decisions when you go to the grocery store. Send a message that this is unacceptable. It's not consistent with your values, and work on a higher level as Animal Outlook is trying to do. It sounds like on the advocacy department, but can we get some basic protections for these animals so that this wanton violence doesn't happen on a routine basis?
It's really important to get these stories out there, what the animals are going through and what people are ultimately paying for when they go and purchase these products. Everybody has a right to know, and I try to provide as much information as I can from this important undercover work.
You and your organization are doing it. We are here today to share this valuable information with you. We want you to be empowered to make more informed decisions for what's important to you. Do you want to support this horribly violent industry so that you can get a 10 or 15 minutes of pleasure for your palate? At what cost does that food come? And the labels that are on there, is there any label that you can go to a store and buy and those chickens actually had a good life up until their time of death? Or is it all just marketing schemes to make people feel better and get more of their money by duping them into thinking that they're paying for more welfare, but they're not? Do you have a thought on that?
Yes, so we actually have done work to bring to light when these labels on animal products are not the reality of how those animals were treated. In the time that I was undercover, I did 4 different investigations over the course of 2 years, and I saw cruelty during every investigation on every farm that I investigated. That right there just says it all. By the time that the consumer goes in and purchases that product, they're going off of what the label says. They're going off of what the imagery is on the milk carton or on the package that the chicken meat is in when they pick it up. That's the first thing that they see. It might be the only thing they see, and it's not the reality of how those products were produced.
Can't believe labels on any of these products. They are completely divorced from reality. They're marketing ploys to get you to spend more money. Think about that when you're shopping and you're buying products. Do you want to support these industries? This is the norm. It's not just the one farm or the two. It's a normal, standard operating procedure. So please think of that. Make smart decisions with how you spend your money and the businesses you support. Erin, I do want to hear about dairy. I saw your undercover investigation first on that. I found it extremely moving. Personally, what I think is a false sense for a long time that the cows on dairy farms, because they're not slaughtered and turned into meat, that somehow their lives might not be as bad as cows that are turned into our hamburger and our steak. Eliminating dairy from my diet was probably the last thing to go when I was moving away from animals. Your investigation actually helped solidify that decision. Personally, it's inconsistent with my values to spend $1 on an industry that can be so horrifically cruel. Doesn't matter what it tastes like. I'd like you to share some of that to see if we can get this out to my listening audience.
What you mentioned about what your journey was, that dairy was the last thing to go for you. A lot of people have a similar experience. For me, I was vegetarian for a year before I went and decided to cut out all animal products from my diet. I made that decision the day that I became an undercover investigator. I said, if I'm going to do this, I can't support any of these industries. I can't support any sector of animal agriculture if I'm going to be an advocate for animals. I can't contribute with my money to what I was going to see during my time undercover. So the dairy investigations, those were actually some of the more difficult investigations for me, because cows are just very maternal, caring beings. And a lot of people have a sense of that. I think people can picture cows and picture just these really cuddly, cute animals. They like to take care of their babies. And when you see a herd maybe passing through a rural area, maybe the countryside, and you see a herd of cows, you'll always see a mother with her baby if they're out in a field and they're not dairy cows, for example. So those would probably be like cows destined to become meat, and they're beef cows, as the industry designates them as. They have strong family ties, and that can even be seen when they're in captivity and they're kept in these environments that otherwise they would be off doing whatever, their own thing. But if they're being farmed, I think for them, they make the best of a bad situation, and they still have those really strong family ties. It was so painful for me to see during my first dairy investigation where the farm manager or the workers would tear away the babies from the mothers. Just not very long after the calves were birthed, they were separated from their mother cows. I remember seeing them being so confused because they didn't know what was going on, and they were just watching their baby be taken away. And then this baby has just been birthed not too long ago, being carried away by a stranger and just having entered the world. They don't know what's going on either. They were put into a separate pen at first until they were prepared to then be placed into a calf crate, which is a little tiny crate, plastic or wooden crate, with a very small little fenced in area to the point where all they could do is walk out of the crate, turn around, and walk right back in. And that was where those calves were kept. And they couldn't be with their mothers on the farm site. I saw a lot of these calves that were kept in these crates. And the sad thing about it was the crates were situated right across from where the maternity barn was, as they put it. So where all of the pregnant cows, the cows who had just given birth, they were kept in that barn. So they could see the calves, they could see the babies from across the way, but they couldn't get to them. The calves were constantly crying out, and the mother cows could hear that. So when you think about dairy, I think that's the thing that most picture is that bond between the mothers and the babies, because these cows, they have to be pregnant and give birth in order to produce milk. That bond being severed constantly in the dairy industry. So that was an introduction where I was able to see it firsthand during my time working at the 2 dairy farms I investigated. That was when I was able to see how bad it got, because just the calves being separated, that was just the tip of the iceberg. It got more and more brutal and violent as the months went on that I was undercover at these facilities. What I ended up seeing still haunts me to this day, for sure. It was just so sad. I was witnessing all of the horrible things that the workers were doing to a lot of these cows. They would get to a point where they were being milked twice a day, every day. Eventually, their bodies would give out. Frequently, I was documenting cows who became too sick or injured to even walk. They were subjected to abuse by workers who would drag the cows from tractors. They punched and kicked the cows. They would twist their tails in order to force them into the milking area where a lot of the abuse would happen. They would shock them with electric prods, and they would beat them with heavy steel pipes at one of the dairy farms. And then through all of that the cows are experiencing, they're also forced to live in filth and walking through thick body waste like feces that would run like rivers of sludge through their barns where they stayed, and the milking areas as well. Just pools of manure that in some cases it would get so deep that when I would walk through those same areas, my boots would get stuck. And then I'd have to yank my legs free with every step I took. That's how much body waste that was just running through these facilities. Yeah, really disgusting, horrible conditions. And not only that, but they're forced to be subjected to extreme cruelty as well by frustrated workers who get tired with dealing with them.
That sounds like it's hard to imagine a worse existence. In humans, there's a very strong maternal bond. It's biochemical. After delivery, there are hormonal changes which drive the strong feeling of a connection with your newborn. And that's preserved because it's survival of the species. You will not want to be separated. The baby, your child does not want to be separated. There's a very strong bond there that gets built. It sounds like cows have that as well. That's probably something that's conserved across species for a minimum for survival of the species. If a mom does not have that strong drive to protect and care for and feed her newborn, the species' survival could be threatened. I think it's very naive to think that the maternal bond that some of my female listeners out there who have kids may have experienced stops because you're a human and doesn't extend to other species. Consider the trauma, the mental trauma that both go through these mama cows and their babies as a result of human intervention. We get them pregnant so that we can take their babies away and take the milk, which is designed for the baby cow, the calf, and we turn it into a food product. You can speculate as to whether our bodies are even designed to drink it or not, right? It's been promoted, and we've been told that milk does a body good, that you need calcium and vitamin D, and that it's healthy. It makes good bones. That's the marketing that we've seen for decades. Is it really true? Do we need cow's milk? Is it really healthy? Why are there such high rates of lactose intolerance? Why do we have products on the market that have the enzymes built into the cow's milk to break down the lactose, which you find in cow's milk, that human bodies a lot of the times are not designed to be consuming and drinking? Dairy is linked to a host of medical problems, including cancer. Cows are the animals that we have in this country to make a product. We impregnate them, we take their babies, we squeeze as much milk out of their bodies that's supposed to be for their babies, and we make cheese and yogurt and ice cream and all these products which are worked into our culture now and considered desirable and we're willing to pay for. How natural is it? Especially something like ice cream, which is even less than a meal. It's gone in a couple of minutes. Is that worth it for the suffering that you're sponsoring?
You made really great points. Just thinking about how these animals are used and then they're discarded. And then what you mentioned earlier, where it's just a lot of people think that cows live pretty decent lives because they're not going to be produced strictly for meat, is what people assume. The dairy cows, once they have no more milk to give, or once their bodies give out, they collapse from overexertion. They have to go somewhere, and they end up at the same slaughterhouses as the beef cows, the cows that are produced for beef purposes. Dairies actually are huge suppliers of the beef industry as well. A lot of people don't realize that. When cows collapsed on the dairy farms where I investigated, they were euthanized in one case In particular, I documented a farm manager who shot a cow in the head with a rifle on site on the dairy farm. They chopped the cow up right there on the dairy farm, and then they distributed the meat to the workers. In one case that I documented, there was an incident where a cow had collapsed in the back of a barn. It was raining and it was really cloudy on that day. The farm manager, he tells me, "Oh, come over here," because I was in the barn and I was cleaning out stalls or something like that. So I go over and I see he's out there behind the barn with this cow who looks very emaciated, just really weak. And she was laying on her side. She looked really cold because it was raining that day and it was a really cold day. And then the farm manager says, "Oh, this one, she collapsed." He said in so many words that he was going to kill her. He asked me to go and get his rifle for him. I go and I retrieve the rifle and the bullets, and then I bring that stuff to him, hand it to him. The whole time while he's casually loading his rifle and everything, I'm just staring at this cow. She doesn't know what's going on. She is in pain, most likely. She's collapsed in the gravel behind a barn in the pouring rain. I can only imagine what she was feeling in that moment. Just scared, maybe. Did she even know what the rifle was, what it would do to her? And then the farm manager ends up shooting her in the head with that rifle. And then I documented her collapse from the first shot. And then not long after that, she ends up sitting right back up and righting herself. And she was blinking. So she was still conscious and alive. The manager just casually said, "That was not successful." And then he goes to reload his rifle really calmly as this cow is struggling with a bullet in her skull. She suffered like that for at least a minute before the manager then shot her again. And that time she collapsed and she didn't get back up again. That experience alone just put it all together for me, just how these facilities see these animals. At the end of the day, they are units of production to them. They tag them with numbers. Even if they give them names, eventually they end up at the same slaughterhouses that everybody else does, whether they're a chicken, a pig, a cow, turkey. They end up at the same place where they're going to be killed, and they live horrible lives before they even get to that point. And the slaughterhouses are very brutal as well. So they live pretty miserable lives all the way up until those lives are taken from them. And that's their existence. That's what animal agriculture is.
That's very moving and great information you're able to share. The life of a dairy cow is not better than the life of an animal that spends its life on a feedlot and then to a slaughterhouse. And think about that when you're buying ground beef that may have come from a dairy cow that had these repeated cycles of getting pregnant, having their babies taken away, getting electroshocked, getting dragged across the floor in their own stool and feces when they get up on their own. And after they're so physically drained and tortured to the point where they can't even stand, that becomes your hamburger. That's what you're supporting when you buy that. That okay with you? Maybe it is, but I want you to be aware of that. The two industries are linked, as Erin just said. Hamburger meat, the ground beef you get, sometimes it's from a dairy cow that was tortured its entire life. Think about that when you go to the grocery store. Do you have anything to say on how the cows are impregnated, where the source of that comes from, for example, and what that process is like?
Artificial insemination is a very invasive procedure that dairy cows have to go through. They don't have to, right? They're forced to. It involves workers inserting these long rods into the dairy cow's genitalia. Then the workers insert their arms into the genitalia as well of these cows. They're putting these foreign objects into their bodies, and this is done right on the dairy farm. It's not in a sterile environment. During my time undercover at the dairy farms that I investigated, when the cows were checked to see if they were pregnant, the workers would insert their entire arms into the rear ends of these cows to check and see if they were pregnant with a calf. They would put on a plastic sleeve in their arm, but that's pretty much it. And they're doing this in the same environment that the cows are kept in on the farm site. It was so much waste that these cows were producing. It was right there on the farm site. So you can imagine they're doing this very invasive procedure in a non-sterile environment. Is really disgusting to see what they were putting these cows through and how casually the workers were able to do this kind of work. It's just so bizarre to be completely comfortable with inserting any part of your body to an animal like that, different species, and the way that the workers were doing that. It was very disturbing to see.
I did want to hear a little bit about your experience on a salmon hatchery. As I talked about with you earlier, dairy is one of the last things to go for animal products for me. Fish was probably the next to last. Pushing me in that direction was what I learned about how disgusting and just generally unhealthy fish farms are. So yeah, I've seen pictures of it and read about it. Are you able to try and convey what you saw on your fish farm and what that's like for how the fish are treated, the environment they're raised in before they get turned into the nice pink packaged salmon that we see in the grocery store?
For my investigation of the salmon hatchery that was in Maine, that investigation was really eye-opening for me because I had no idea how farmed fish were produced, and salmon in particular. I didn't really know. I didn't eat a lot of salmon growing up, so I had no clue the scale of these facilities when you think about it, because for me, I don't know if it's the same for anybody else, but I think about how much space a facility takes up or something like that. The place didn't take that much space. It wasn't that much land, but the scale that I'm talking about, the amount of fish, the amount of animals that are packed into that one facility, it was mind-boggling to me because they could do that because they're dealing with fish. The facility that I investigated, for every tank that they had on site, there were some tanks where they had 100,000 fish in one tank, 50,000, 25,000 fish in one tank. There were many buildings with many tanks, so there are at least 1 million or more fish at this one facility. That's a lot of animals in one place because they have these fish in these tanks where there's no enrichment inside of those tanks. It's just water, filled with water. The fish are just swimming in circles all day, every day. Nothing else to look at inside of these tanks where they're packed in, intensely confined, just like all the other farms. They're intensely confined inside of these tanks. And there was an issue with fungus infections spreading in the tanks pretty frequently. One of the primary duties that I was assigned to was removing fungus from the tanks and removing dead fish from the tanks. A lot of fish were dying on a daily basis. Some tanks I was removing almost 1,000 fish in one shift from one tank alone. That's how many fish were dying off. But when they have such a huge amount of fish on the farm site, that huge number was not really an issue for them. But if you think on a chicken farm, a pig farm, or on a beef farm, even like a beef ranch, you get 1,000 cows die, 1,000 chickens die in one shed, or 1,000 cows in one area of the farm in one day. That would be a big deal to any farmer. But on the fish farm, that was just par for the course. The fungus infections really did a lot of the fish in. At the facility, they would frequently be short of staff. They weren't able to cover a lot of those tanks with workers to remove the fungus in time before it would end up spreading to more and more fish that resulted in more and more deaths. It was just really hard to see how casually the workers would regard such a huge loss of life on the farm site. And then the way that they discarded these fish, they would just throw them into empty buckets without any water in the buckets. So the fish would slowly suffocate to death. And then once workers would fill up the buckets with these discarded fish who would slowly suffocate, they would throw those fish into this big concrete pit. Any fish who had fungus infections were deformed or covered in the fungus, they'd throw them into.
So the fungus infects, you could see it on their body.
Yeah, and they would be covered with some substance that, the fungus looked white and fuzzy inside of some of the tanks and was a clear indicator of infection in some of
Those obviously diseased fish get pulled out of the tank.
Yeah, they get thrown in these buckets without any water inside. And then once the buckets were filled up, they were thrown in this giant concrete pit that was called the mortality pit on the farm site. And they would dump the fish into that pit. And it would just fill up over time with dead, decomposing fish. I remember one worker told me during the summer when the sun would shine down on that pit and start baking the contents of that pit, the smell would spread all throughout the small town that the fish farm was located at. And people would be able to smell it for miles in open air because this concrete pit, it wasn't covered by anything. It was just there. The sun would shine down on it and bake the contents of that pit, and the smell would spread for miles. It was really disgusting.
Do they just let them disintegrate, or do they haul them away somewhere? What's the waste management plan?
It didn't seem like they had a lot of good plans at that facility. Things were just really seemed to be very haphazardly managed. And when I spoke with managers on the farm site, they did comment on how outdated the management of the facility was. So in terms of just like what happened with that pit, during the time that I was there at the facility, I didn't see how they discarded or emptied out that pit. I just saw it getting piled higher and higher, and it turned into this like pool of just decomposing bodies.
What happens to their waste? The fish waste when they're in these giant tanks? How does that get dealt with?
I'm not entirely sure. I know that, of course, the fish are relieving themselves inside of the water that they're swimming in.
They're in these giant tanks, 10 or 20,000 fish, relieving themselves. So fish excrement, and they're swimming in that their entire lives. Their bodies are coated in it. They get fungal infections on their skin. And at some point they get turned into food. If they're lucky enough to not get an infection and be pulled out and suffocated to death, to not be turned into food. I'm not sure which of those fish is luckier, to be honest, if you could even use that word. And the packaging and the marketing, as Erin talked about before, it's so deceptive. When you look at that beautiful pink, almost odorless, nice chunk of salmon meat in the store, it belies the fact that if it's farmed fish, as opposed to wild caught, which has its own set of issues, welfare issues, these animals have been getting secondary infections. They are often fed antibiotics or some kind of antimicrobials that then you consume as well. The process to me just seems disgusting. Putting aside the welfare issues, you're eating these animals which have been packaged, and maybe there's a nice smiling fish on the label. Maybe there's something that says humanely sourced or something along those lines. If the package says farmed fish, this is where they're coming from, no matter what's put otherwise on the label. It's a disgusting environment. The fish live a horrible, crappy life. And you're eating these fish that swim around in their own waste their entire life, and fungus and antibiotic residue. Once I discovered that, I can't eat that anymore. I'm really glad to hear this story from Erin firsthand of just how disgusting of an operation is. fish farming. I hope you got some valuable information from this podcast episode. I know I did, just listening to Erin's incredible stories. And this is just a snippet of what's going on every single day to millions of animals all over the country, all over the world for that matter, and then have something on the label that makes perhaps the customer, you, feel better, that maybe they're not suffering as much. Maybe they were treated well because there's a nice label or something that says humane or natural or some other nice label out there. You can't believe the label. Can't believe it. We have firsthand information now from Erin on what life is like for that chicken before it gets turned into the chicken breast that you see in the grocery store. What life is like for the salmon before you buy the nice pink piece of salmon flesh in the store, and cheese and yogurt and ice cream. All those other products which come from immense suffering, sexual violence on these animals, emotional suffering. For me, I can't support that anymore, and I haven't. I'm not going to spend $1 on any of that. And I'm here to try and educate you so that you can decide if that's consistent with your values or not. Supporting the industry, getting a few minutes of pleasure for your palate a few times a day, knowing that these animals are suffering not just a little, they're suffering immensely, and it's just vile and gross, living in their own waste that then you're eating when you buy the product. I've made the personal decision it's not consistent with my values. Maybe you'll come to that decision or not, but you have the information now. I hope that you're going to make a more informed decision going forward. Erin, we're just about at the end. I wanted to give you final statements to conclude this. Any final message you'd like to get out to the public? What they can do to make different decisions. If they've learned something, where can they go to learn more? If they're interested in looking it up on their own, how can they make a difference and help out the important work that you're doing? Because none of us can do it alone. We can amplify our voices, get it out, make different decisions.
Thanks for having me on to talk about all of this. It is really important to share so that people are aware of what they might be supporting that they wouldn't know if it wasn't for undercover investigations. And we show the raw reality of what these animals go through. And it's really important to think about the fact that there is nothing that is more authentic than the way that people operate when they think no one is watching. And that's why undercover investigations will show the truth that's behind the products that are purchased in the grocery stores, that people, they believe and trust in the animal agriculture industry, that they're going to be provided a product that was produced in a way where nobody wants to purchase a product that was produced through suffering of an animal. So many Americans don't want that. And yet that's what's being put into the hands of consumers, and they're purchasing it without even knowing. At the end of the day, that's why we're here, to expose what those animals go through, expose the truth behind animal agriculture practices. One of the most important things that people can do is to remove their support from an industry that does perpetuate harm and suffering to animals, to humans, and our planet. People should have a right to make an informed decision, to make that choice, because they know the truth behind the products. That will most likely inspire someone to say, I don't want to support that anymore. And everybody should have the right to make that informed decision. That right shouldn't be withheld from anyone just because it might affect some large corporation's bottom line. That is why it's so hard to get this information out there. But when people finally come across it, that's when they are empowered with the knowledge to make the right choice, to decide not to support such a harmful industry. That information is in the hands of the people because of the hard work that we do to put the truth out there about how animal products are really produced. And if anyone wants to learn more and expand their knowledge about these products that are put out there, they can go to animaloutlook.org and see more of our investigations work. If they can stomach it, the imagery, the videos, it's the stuff of nightmares, but it's real. It's what's really happening. And if people want to learn more, they can go and see our 30 years worth of investigations work that we've done. And we're not stopping. We'll continue to do it and put that knowledge in the hands of consumers for us to be doing that hard work. Any support that we get from people who support our work, that makes all the difference. Just listening, that's one step in the right direction. And then action would be the next step.
Thank you, Erin, for all the difficult work you're doing to get this information out there. Please, I do encourage you to visit Animal Outlook. Erin said we all should at least be informed, have accurate information. Nobody likes to be deceived and lied to, especially on something as important on how you're spending your money and the food you're putting in your body. Stay informed, make better decisions that are meaningful to you and your family. Thank you so much, Erin. It's been a pleasure having you on here.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. These conversations aren't always easy, but they're important and worth having. Take what resonates, ask questions, and keep learning. If you enjoyed this episode or otherwise just interested in learning more, you can email me at john@johnliebermanmd.com. That's John, John, at JOHNLIEBERMANMD.com.